What is up, beautiful people? Welcome to another episode of The Coach's Quarters. I am your host, Jacob Meadows, and today we are going to do a dive on the division round. We're going to post-cap the games. We're going to take a look at what happened and kind of break down what went wrong for the teams that lost, some of the things that went right for the teams that won. I have a special guest for you that I will introduce here in a little bit. And with that said, we're going to jump right into it. So in a flip from the Super Wildcard weekend where I got all of the AFC teams correct, I whiffed hard on the winners for the AFC side. I did really well on the NFC side. And here's what happened. I took Houston to beat Baltimore. Baltimore ended up winning 34-10 to move on. Kansas City versus Buffalo. I took Buffalo to win. Kansas City ended up winning to move on. They will face Baltimore in Baltimore for the AFC Championship. And then on the NFC side, I took San Francisco to beat Green Bay, which they did 24-21. And I took Detroit to beat Tampa Bay, which they did 31-23. So I went 2 for 2 on the NFC side, went 0 for 2 on the AFC side. I am so sorry if you listened to this show and gambled based on what I said. I did whiff pretty hard on the AFC this year. But that is the short little bit that you're going to get just from me. So we have like I said earlier, a special guest coming in. It's a guy that I met in Vegas when I was traveling around for the Pixar In show that I helped launch in Vegas with the Mr. Pix, and then the Mean Gene show, which is actually the show that got me started on the podcasting platforms in general. He's a wizard with all sports knowledge. He covers the Charlotte Hornets and the Carolina Panthers by trade. Please give a warm round of applause for the man, the myth, the legend, Bally Sports' very own Dustin Pheifer, the Sports King.
Jacob, what's going on, man? Happy to be on with you. Happy to come on and talk some football. I know we've had some run-ins in Vegas before, and I am finally glad to be able to come on the show and talk some football.
Dude, this is awesome. It is so cool having you on this show after working with you, the Mean Gene, on his show. It is an honor and a pleasure, and it is all mine, brother. How is the weather out there for you guys?
Listen, man, it's cold, kind of like the whole country. It's cold. It's got down to about 20 degrees here at night, so we're not really used to that over here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We like to keep it around 30, 40 degrees, but it's been really cold, just like we've seen it at some of these football games, and so I'm trying to adjust just like the players are. I'm trying to stay warm and hopefully not get any frostbite like some of those players did in Kansas City.
Oh, man. Yeah, no kids. You see that it was like 24 people treated for hypothermia after that game. Isn't that nuts?
Yeah, that's insane. Like I said, that's one of the coldest games that I've seen, and I believe I saw a guy with his shirt off. Not sure. I don't think that turned out too well for him, but that's kind of been the story of these playoffs and these outdoor games is this cold weather and how it's affected some of these teams.
You know, I'm pretty sure he was a Miami fan, too. Like, flew all the way out from Miami, then went shirtless in a negative 31-degree wind chill, which is just ridiculous. But, yeah, this cold weather has been something else with these playoff games, man. Every single outdoor stadium has been afflicted with just brutal cold temperatures, and it's affected every single game so far.
Yeah, it has. And I think we'll see that again this weekend, obviously, in Baltimore. I haven't seen the forecast yet, but I would expect it to be very cold there. And then in San Francisco, obviously it'll be warmer, but they have been dealing with some rain out there as well. So we'll have to look at the weather and see how they affect both of these championship games on Sunday. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. But with that being said, we are going to cover the divisional round today. I figure we will start with Houston v. Baltimore, a team, like you just said, was afflicted by bad weather. And we're kind of just going to break down some of what happened with the game, kind of who took positives away, who took negatives away, the direction that the teams are going to go into after this. We're going to make it pretty short, sweet, and to the point so that you can get on out of here. But yeah, so Houston v. Baltimore, dude. Houston went into this game as underdogs, and they win in as underdogs despite just blasting the Cleveland Browns out of the water in the wild card round. What did you take away from this game? So if you look at not Lamar, if you look at Houston's body of work for this game, what were some of the takeaways that you were able to bring out of this as to where the needle needs to move for the future?
Yeah, well, first of all, you got to give credit to Houston and the season they've had. So to bring in a first-year head coach in D'Amico Ryans, draft C.J. Stroud, trade up and get Will Anderson, they really turned this thing around quickly. Obviously, we expected to see some improvement in year one, but the fact that they were able to win the AFC South and go on the run that they went to is just an incredible testament to what they built out there in Houston, and the future is bright. And I'll be honest with you, I did pick Baltimore to win this game, but I expected Houston to hang around in this game the way they had been playing. You just mentioned it. They blasted Cleveland, which had one of the top defenses in the NFL. So I expected them to come in and have some success on offense. And that's where you got to give a ton of credit to the Baltimore Ravens and one of the reasons they are the number one seed, because that was a game for about the first half. Everybody was hanging in. Looks like the Baltimore offense was struggling. But you see on good teams and a number one seeded team like Baltimore, the adjustments they made at halftime. And they just came out on fire in the second half on offense and defense and put that game way out of reach. So you got to give a huge credit to Baltimore, which I'm sure we'll talk about in just a minute. But for Houston, I know it ended bad with a blowout loss, but to win the division, win a playoff game, and then be one game away from the AFC Championship, I don't think you could have asked for a better season in Houston. And the future is very bright. As we've seen, C.J. Stroud is just going to be a star in this league. And they are just now getting started. So look out AFC South, look out AFC. This team is going to be around for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a legendary run by D'Amico and Stroud in Houston. And, one of the things that really stood out to me with them is that D'Amico came out in his post-game presser and said that the run game was going to be something that he was going to be heavily involved with moving forward, seeing as how the run game was pretty non-existent week in and week out for Houston. Against Baltimore, they had 14 total carries for 38 total yards over the game. So like you said, it's a testament to just how good that Baltimore defensive line is, how good that defense is as a whole. It really feels like they may have put together the most complete roster in football, and it really just felt like Baltimore unleashed it on Houston. We kept it relatively close in the beginning of the season when Houston went up against Baltimore, and here in the playoffs, it was just a completely different animal. And it's really going to come down to what we're able to adjust in the offseason with free agency and the draft and what have you, because the run game was a problem. The offensive line as a whole was a problem in this game, just like it was, for most of the rest of the season. But was there anything specific that jumped out to you about Baltimore's approach to this game that really, really cemented how much better they were than Houston was here in the divisional round of the playoffs?
Yeah, well, I think the two things you just mentioned, you talk about the run game on both sides. Obviously, Houston could not run the ball, so it kind of was thrown on C.J. Stroud's shoulders. And going forward, that will be something they need to build on because, again, everybody's going to have tape on C.J. Stroud now going into year two. And you know how NFL coaches are. They're going to make adjustments. So Houston needs to make adjustments in how they build around C.J. Stroud. So that was kind of the biggest thing I saw in that game was just not being able to run the ball. And you mentioned it. It really was in the trenches. You talk about Baltimore's offensive line protecting, and obviously it helps when you have Lamar Jackson in the legs if he can run when he needs to. But it's just winning in the trenches. Houston was blitzing Lamar all first half, and it was working. But then once Baltimore was able to make those adjustments, whether it was extra protection, shifting the lines, whatever it may be, they were able to kind of open it up, get some points, use that run game. And so that was kind of the biggest thing I saw was in the trenches. I think Houston has a great base. But you can see the difference there of a team who's developing and growing a plan to a team like Baltimore who's already got their plan in place. And their plan in place is to be physical, win in the trenches, use that run game, and then make explosive plays when needed with either Lamar's legs or his arms. And that was the difference in that game on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Just to piggyback off of that, just to put it into perspective, like I said, Houston had 14 total carries for 38 yards. Lamar Jackson himself accounted for 11 carries for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. And as a team, Baltimore had 42 carries for 229 yards and 2 touchdowns total. So I absolutely agree. Baltimore won in the trenches. Their D-line held up Houston's offensive run game and their offense in general. And then on the Baltimore offense side, they were just a juggernaut on the ground. And ultimately, I think that was the most defining factor in the game overall.
Yeah, and listen, that new style, that new scheme, you got to give Baltimore's offensive coordinator a lot of credit in Todd Monken, because he came over and listen, this offense for Baltimore used to be, it's all relying on Lamar Jackson, whether it's running, trying to throw. They had everything on his shoulders. And the quarterback is going to have a lot on his shoulders. But you've got to build that complete team around him where you don't have to rely on him to make this big game-changing play every play of the game. And that's what they've finally done. They've shifted their offense to where it's not just Lamar and his legs, it's the running backs. And then it also is the play action and then being able to make explosive plays when needed. And they finally put more weapons around him with Odell Beckham Jr., with Zay Flowers. They didn't even have Mark Andrews. We'll see if he plays this week. But they finally built that, like you just said, you mentioned it, a complete team around him where you don't just solely have to rely on Lamar trying to take the game over. And that just makes him so much better as a quarterback and is what is probably going to win him the MVP of the league.
Absolutely agree. I think you summed it up perfectly. I couldn't have said it any better myself. I do think that is just the summation of what the MVP is going to end up being, and the efficiency for that team all around is what has carried them throughout this entire season as the number one seed in the AFC. But speaking of,
and one last point on that, you know what else is done for Baltimore? Look at the last few years. Lamar Jackson was always hurt. He was always banged up. When it came playoff time, he wasn't 100%. The fact that they were able to be efficient and not rely on him as much allowed him to be healthy throughout this full season. And now they've got their best chance, probably since Lamar has came in and been the quarterback, to have a chance to go to the Super Bowl this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like giving him receivers that can catch the ball, having two really good tight ends, because Isaiah Likely has really shined in the absence of Mark Andrews. But you give him this offense. They have 6 running backs that could be starting running backs anywhere else. You give him receivers that are good with the ball, that can run good routes, that can catch when needed to catch. And all of a sudden, Lamar Jackson's healthy all year and blowing people out in the playoffs. What a just mind-boggling idea, right?
Yeah.
But moving on. So speaking of a good run game, next game up is going to be Kansas City versus Buffalo. And this was a kind of a tale of two stories. But in talking about just offensive efficiency like we were with the Baltimore Ravens, Kansas City was incredibly efficient on offense against Buffalo. They had Isaiah Pacheco was averaging like 8.2 yards a carry, had 95 yards on 15 carries and a handful of touchdowns. Patrick Mahomes looked like he couldn't miss. You know what? In this game, what specifically, what kind of stood out to you from Buffalo or Kansas City in this one that ultimately did, Buffalo in the end?
Well, listen, this was the game that lived up to the hype that we thought it was going to be at. It was advertised as the game of the weekend, the game of the playoffs. That's what I fully expected. It turned out to be that. And listen, I had the Chiefs from the beginning. I picked this game. A few weeks ago, I was riding high on the Bills, but the Chiefs and this game kind of played out the way I thought it would, Jacob, because what happens is everybody talks about Patrick Mahomes and his receivers and the drops, and this offense is not the same. And it's not. It's a completely different offense. It's not as explosive as they used to be with Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, Travis Kelce, even when they had Tyreek Hill. But the one thing that people do not talk about enough with this Chiefs team is that this is the best defense that Patrick Mahomes has had since he's been a quarterback in the league. And again, we talk about taking pressure off of quarterbacks. Having a defense that can get stops, get turnovers, get pressure on the quarterback makes it so much easier on the offense, even when they're not going full go like the Kansas City Chiefs normally do. And that's what happens. And look what happened finally when the Chiefs were able to get the offense going a little bit, finally get Travis Kelce back in his rhythm, getting Rashid Rice, getting all these guys involved, even Valdez-Scantling making plays. They finally, when the offense started clicking, it went with that defense, and it just lined up perfectly for them. And I knew that Kansas City was going to have all of this bulletin board material, and everybody saying they cannot go on the road and win a playoff game because Patrick Mahomes has never done it. But it's hard to bet against Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid in the playoffs, and they showed that on Sunday, winning a thriller in Buffalo.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, and with Kansas City, so are you And this is forecasting for the AFC Championship, but are you at all concerned that this was Travis Kelce's first big outing in a handful of weeks, and it came at the expense of a Buffalo's linebacking core that has been absolutely dismantled throughout the season with injuries? You know, you have Terrell Bernard go down for the rest of the season last week. That was kind of that final domino that fell, and you saw Travis Kelce just absolutely blow up in this game. But do you think that this game was more or less Kansas City's to win because of what Buffalo has had to go through this season with all of the defensive injuries and whatnot? Or do you think that Kansas City, with this improved defense, is actually just the better team and it showed this weekend?
I think it's a great point by you. I think it's a little bit of both. You listen, Buffalo, we talked about it on our shows with me and Gene, the Sports Kings, in the past, that Buffalo, their season has been a roller coaster. And it's not just the injuries. It's, the coaching, changing offensive coordinators, Stephon Diggs being unhappy. And you talked about the injuries, losing Matt Milano, losing the corner and White, losing all these guys. Von Miller comes back. He's not the same player. It's just been a roller coaster. So props to them that they were able to find it around playoff time to make this run, because at one point we weren't sure if they were even going to get in the playoffs. So you got to give them props there. But I think it's a combination of both, Jacob. Obviously, those injuries are going to play a factor, and you got to give Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes credit for taking advantage of that and using Kelce as a weapon in the middle of the field. And so that is going to be a huge, huge matchup when you talk about Roquan Smith for Baltimore and the defense that they have going against Travis Kelce. That's going to be a matchup to watch. But I think on the other side, I think it is more about Kansas City adjusting to the team that they are now. It's no longer about going and winning shootouts. It's about playing good defense, taking care of the football, and then making big plays when needed. And I think they've adjusted to that well. I think they're playing their best football of the season at the right time. And I'm not making my pick yet. I'm not sure if they're going to go into Baltimore and win. But I think with the game plan they have, with a good defense and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, that they definitely can go in there and make this a very good game on Sunday.
Incredibly well said. I've got one last question for you on this game. That's, Josh Allen has really led this team the last couple of years. He looked great on the ground for this one. Do you think that Josh Allen is going to fall from the echelons of that elite quarterback that he has been touted as the last couple of years by the media and what have you? Because at the end of the day, especially in this game, there were a handful of throws that Josh Allen wished he would have had back that were just underthrown or overthrown or just not where they needed to be. Is Josh Allen becoming the liability that is keeping the Buffalo Bills outside of the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I'm not going to go as far as a liability, because he definitely is still one of, to me, I guess we're talking top 10 quarterbacks in the league now. Is he on that elite platform of a Patrick Mahomes? I guess we can throw Lamar Jackson in there now since he's starting to win these playoff games. Like those type guys, Aaron Rodgers when he's healthy. I'm not sure if he's on that elite level, but he's on that next tier. He's a quarterback who definitely, I think, you can win a Super Bowl with. But it all goes back to what we said about Baltimore and Lamar Jackson, Jacob. You can't just rely on Josh Allen to do everything. He can't be your leading rusher. He can't be throwing the ball all over the place, trying to make these crazy deep throws. You've got to build a team around him to where it doesn't have to be all on his shoulders. And I think the offensive coordinator change to Joe Brady started to do that. That's why you saw them playing better football. They let James Cook run the ball more. He was explosive. They started getting their tight ends more involved with Kincaid. And listen, they were banged up. They didn't have Gabe Davis in this playoff game. So it's all about building around him. I don't think he's a guy like back in the day of Tom Brady or anybody like that who's going to overcome some of the stuff they have on the team. But he's a guy you can win with. You just got to build it the right way. And listen, if we're going to talk about it, I know he missed a couple throws late in that game, but let's also not forget that Stephon Diggs dropped a bomb that really could have set them up. And when you're a number one receiver, you got to make that catch. And I fully do not expect Stephon Diggs to be in Buffalo next year. We've heard this for a couple of years. He got worse as the season went on. I think it's time to cut ties there and see how you can build it the other way. So Josh Allen, yes, you can win with him, but let's get the right weapons around him. Let's get the game plan in place to where you ground and pound, win in the trenches. Because, again, we've seen it. You just mentioned it with Josh Allen. When he has to really try to take over, he can turn the ball over sometimes. And so you've got to find that balance of where he's still that explosive player, because he's one of the most explosive, fun players to watch. But you also got to have that balance where he doesn't go too far over the line and turn the ball over and cost your team a game.
It's an interesting take that you've raised with Stephon Diggs no longer being in Buffalo, because here at the TCQ studios, we also believe that Stephon Diggs is out after this season in Buffalo.
Yeah.
So do you think that they end up doing something with both Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs? You know, Gabe Davis has been very hit or miss. He's missed some time here in the playoffs with injuries. Stephon Diggs has been, liability is the wrong word for it, but a liability. So
Yeah.
my thinking is that they do probably shake up their entire receiving core, seeing as how, sure, Josh Allen did miss some throws, but there were some also really bad drops. Dalton Kincaid seems to be the future of the tight end position. They probably need a running back to supplant James Cook. But what do you think that they do with the receiving core after this year? Because like I said, Gabe Davis is probably not in the long-term plans. You have Stephon Diggs, who we both agree probably isn't part of the long-term plans. Where do you think that they go from here?
And your questions is probably why every Buffalo Bills fan is still pissed off to this day that they lost this game. Because if it didn't happen on Sunday when you're at home in this crazy cold weather, you finally get the Chiefs on the road and a chance to take them down. If it wasn't going to happen then, when is it going to happen? And I know that question is going through Buffalo's head, because at this point, we can talk about drop passes, this and that, and if Kansas City was the better team, Kansas City owns the Buffalo Bills. Let's just be honest. Until they knock them off, that's what we're going to say. And now you go into an offseason where you may lose a couple of weapons for Josh Allen, and you got to figure out how to rebuild quickly, because this isn't a, hey, let's take a couple of years and try to get this thing back together. When you have a guy like Josh Allen, you're in a win-now situation. So they got to find a way to make this happen. Like I said, I don't think Stephon Diggs will be there. Gabe Davis is a free agent, and you know teams are looking for receivers, so expect him to get some interest from around the league. So it's going to be interesting to see how they build this back up. But it's one of those things where that general manager is going to have to get aggressive to try to find guys that can come in and produce right now, because this Buffalo Bills fan base is not going to sit back and take a year of trying to regroup and get it back. They're going to want to compete again next year. And also, you got to think Sean McDermott's on the hot seat going into next year, because he has not proven that he can get over that hump in the playoffs as well.
That is also a good point that you've raised. Sean McDermott, one would have to assume that he might actually be on the hot seat going into next year, seeing as how they haven't gotten past the Chiefs. So that'd be something to watch. We could be beginning to see the developing of a soft rebuild there in Buffalo.
Yeah.
And
what sucks about that is that we talk about the Chiefs, but it's not just them. Look at this AFC, Jacob. It's the Chiefs. It's the Ravens. It's, when Joe Burrow's healthy, the Cincinnati Bengals. It's Houston Texans and Stroud now. You still got Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. The AFC is so loaded that if you don't get these pieces right to build around Josh Allen, you will be left in the dust, and you will be talking about that soft rebuild or a complete rebuild quickly, because of how many teams are ready to compete right now in the AFC.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of a soft rebuild, the next team on the docket, we have the Green Bay Packers versus the San Francisco 49ers. And how about that soft rebuild? That soft rebuild in Green Bay, where you have Jordan Love coming in after Aaron Rodgers' departure, playing really well into the playoffs. He ultimately, that final pick was really bad. It was across his body, and it was a really bad throw. But how about the improvement from Jordan Love throughout the season and the future for the Green Bay Packers?
Well, listen, I'm going to stand on record and say this is not fair, Jacob. Listen, I'm a Panthers fan. I'm here in Charlotte. I've been through this quarterback rebuild since we've lost Cam Newton. Now we've got Bryce Young. We're hoping he's going to be the guy they got to build around him. But for the Green Bay Packers to go 30 years, think about this, 30 years with Brett Favre, transition right to Aaron Rodgers, and now transition right to Jordan Love, and to have the guy every time you transition is one of the more incredible things that I've ever seen. And you see all these teams who are looking for quarterbacks year after year, and Green Bay has never had to worry about that. And Jordan Love has easily proved that he is the guy going forward. I thought he played extremely well in these playoffs. Even though he threw the pick to end the game, he had his team in position to win that game on the road against the number one seed. His kicker lets him down with the field goal. And listen, the future is bright. You've got a great offensive mind and Matt LaFleur calling plays. They've got young guys on offense and Watson and Dobbs. You still got Aaron Jones. The future is bright in Green Bay once again with this quarterback. And even though they lost that game where they were winning and they probably should have won, there's no way that every Green Bay fan is not happy right now with what the future is going to be going forward with that organization.
One of the biggest things that stood out to me with Green Bay is that, the secondary failed to capitalize on 3 separate easy interceptions. So if they catch any of those picks, this game's probably a different game. The biggest difference in this game at the end of it was that Dre Greenlaw had 2 interceptions and Green Bay dropped 3 of them. Like, they were just wide open drops. So the fact that Jordan Love, despite that final pick, right? Like, just despite all of the white noise around it, if the secondary picks off 1, maybe 2 of those passes where it hits someone square in the hands in the middle of a route, this game could be totally different. We could be talking about Jordan Love progressing to the NFC Championship in year 1.
Yeah, and those were the interceptions that they made in Dallas. Think about it. They had a pick 6 with Darnell Savage, another interception by Jair Alexander. Those are the plays you have to make if you want to pull the upsets. They did that against Dallas and blowing them out. They had a chance. They were in prime position to do that against San Francisco. But again, when you're playing an elite team like San Francisco, you have to capitalize on those plays, and those are going to be some missed opportunities they look back on.
Absolutely, especially when Brock Purdy has to throw for 39 attempts in this game. When you're getting opportunities, you have to jump on them. That's what separates the good from the great teams. And it feels like Green Bay is knocking on the door, despite them having all the same weapons that Aaron Rodgers couldn't win with. It feels like Green Bay is knocking on the door of being a powerhouse again after. You can't even say after a year off. It wasn't even a year off. They were a powerhouse this year. I mean, it took them a little time to get moving. But, like, they were really good this year. It was a developmental year that ended up going above and beyond expectations, which is pretty neat if you're a Green Bay fan.
Look at that division going forward. Green Bay with Jordan Love, Jared Goff with Detroit. You've got Minnesota, who had a pretty decent year. They got to figure out their quarterback spot. Obviously, with Kirk Cousins, is he going to come back? Are they going to move on? And then look at Chicago. Look how Chicago ended the year with Justin Fields playing, and they've got either a decision to make with him, but they also have the number 1 pick in the draft from my Carolina Panthers, as well as another top 10 pick. So the future in that NFC North is very bright.
Dude, it's going to be so competitive. Like, that's some of the fun stuff to watch with the NFL. Like, that division is just going to be a buzzsaw every time they have to play each other next year, especially if Captain Kirk comes back to the Vikings. Like, that's a good division in football all of a sudden. I mean, I know historically speaking they usually are, but this was a really strange year for that division, and the fact that they could be right back up there to top 2 or 3 divisions in the NFL, like that, it's remarkable. But so with this one, question for you. Do you feel, so I know we already talked about Lamar Jackson's probably winning the MVP. This was just another, statement towards that. Do you feel like what CMC has been able to do, Christian McCaffrey's been able to do in the playoffs, if the MVP were not skewed towards quarterbacks, do you feel like CMC is playing at an MVP caliber level as a running back right now?
Oh, 100%. And listen, I'm happy for his success. This is a guy who was in Carolina when I covered him here, and he was one of the best players in the league, explosive, catching the ball, running the ball, had a lot of injury concerns, and now he's finally on a good team, really getting a chance to be the best player on the team. And listen, we talk about quarterbacks all the time. Is Brock Purdy a very good starting quarterback in this league? He absolutely is. I don't want to take anything away from him and what he's accomplished. But to have a guy like Christian McCaffrey in the backfield, including the other weapons, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Ayuk, all these guys, I mean, it only helps the quarterback. And Christian McCaffrey has just been the bell cow for that team, catching the ball, running the ball. And if it wasn't, you're right, if it wasn't skewed to a quarterback position, I absolutely could see Christian McCaffrey winning the MVP. I think it's that close between him and Lamar. Obviously, it's going to go to a quarterback, but I think he deserves to be right there in the MVP conversation. And he's one of the main reasons his team is one game away from going to a Super Bowl. And I want to go back to something you said about Brock Purdy. Again, nothing against Brock Purdy. The guy can make big-time throws when he needs to. But I know every 49ers fan, and people got mad at Cam Newton for calling this guy a game manager and this and that. But every 49er fan just never want Brock Purdy to throw the ball 39 times. Let's just be honest. That's not how the San Francisco 49ers play football. They want to run it, pound it, give it to Deebo even to run the ball some, hit some of their weapons. And so I look for them to kind of change that game plan up going against Detroit this weekend, because I don't think that's the success for the 49ers to be throwing the ball 39 times a game.
Speaking of Detroit, so one of the biggest things, this is my last question for you for San Francisco, but one of the things that really stood out to me against Green Bay was that San Francisco's pass rush was not as good as I expected it to be.
Yeah.
You know, after they acquired Chase Young at the deadline and they have this top 5 defensive line, do you think that there's cause for concern going into the NFC Championship against Detroit with the fact that their pass rush throughout this season, more or less, has seemingly disappeared against teams that were really good and disappeared? Take that with a grain of salt, right? Like, they've still been really good, but when they've come against some of the better teams that they've played this year, their pass rush seems to disappear. And they did not do a whole lot against Green Bay. Do you think that, again, forecasting for this weekend, but do you think that the pass rush could be a potential problem for the 49ers going up against the Detroit Lions?
Yeah, that absolutely has to be an area of concern because Detroit has one of the better offensive lines in the league. And listen, we've seen Jared Goff. When he has the time, he's got the weapons to make plays. Jahmyr Gibbs, Montgomery, St. Brown, Laporta as a tight end. I mean, he's got the guys to make the plays, and we've seen that Dan Campbell's not afraid to put the ball in his hands. And if San Francisco cannot get pressure on them, it could be trouble because, listen, as much as we've talked about the success of Jordan Love and Green Bay, Detroit's offense is a step above Green Bay. They are one of the better offenses in the league, and they're going to come prepared, ready to play. So I know it's at San Francisco. I know they're favored, and they have a great chance to win this game. But you're 100% right. If they don't figure out a game plan to get more pressure on Jared Goff, we're going to be looking at another down-to-the-wire game where possibly it might not go their way this time.
I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it real well. I took Detroit to make it to the NFC Championship, so I'm excited to see this clash that's coming up. I think Green Bay fought as hard as they could have, and they put up a better. I did not expect this game to be close. Like, that was my one.
And they put up the blueprint. That's the blueprint of how to play San Francisco, to protect your quarterback, use some play action, and you can best believe that Detroit's watching every second of that tape to try to game plan and exploit those tendencies of that defensive line.
Absolutely. Since we've been talking about Detroit, we can go ahead and flip into the final game of the division weekend. We can go ahead and start with Detroit. With Detroit's game plan going into this game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? It looked like Sam Laporta and Amon St. Brown were expected to be the bell cows once again. They had a great game. The offense was surgical against Tampa Bay's defense, despite this resurgence from the Tampa Bay defense. What do you think Detroit did the best playing against Tampa Bay?
Well, again, they protected their quarterback. They got it into their playmakers' hands, I think, is the best thing. Listen, St. Brown is one of the best receivers in the league. And I know he was upset he got snubbed for the Pro Bowl. But when you have him and you have that rookie Laporta, who is already flourishing to be one of the better tight ends in the league, it's all about creating mismatches and getting the ball in your playmakers' hands. And Detroit is one of the best teams at doing that. And they knew Todd Bowles was going to bring the blitz because he likes to blitz almost every single play, and they were ready for it. Whether it was screens to running backs, whether it was getting it quick to St. Brown, whatever it may be, they knew how to exploit that, and they did a great job of that. And then they relied on that home field advantage. I couldn't be more happy for the Detroit fans and how this has played out because it's an unbelievable run. And listen, they are a legit contender, not just to win this game against San Francisco, but to win the Super Bowl. We obviously said about all 4 teams that are left, but just because it's Detroit, let's not sleep on them. You're right. They are going to be in this game with San Francisco, and it's going to be a great game. And I just love the main thing I love about Detroit. We talk about game plan and ins and outs. I just love the belief that Dan Campbell has in his players. And we saw that against the Rams a couple of weeks ago when they could have run the ball and run the clock out, and he gave the ball to Jared Goff and said, go throw a pass and win the game, and he did it. And when players have that belief that their coach believes in them, they're only going to step it up and play that much better. And so I just love what they're doing. I love what they're building, and they have a legit chance to go to San Francisco and get a win, and it's going to be fun to see who can win the game plan on both sides of the ball.
I couldn't agree more. And I love Dan Campbell. I love the fact that everybody's buying into his system. And in terms of that, I think Detroit has the most of that out of any team in the playoffs right now. I think Detroit's players have bought more into Dan Campbell than anybody else around, which is weird to say, seeing as how, John Harbaugh's been in Baltimore forever. Andy Reid's been in Kansas City for a long time. Like these guys have been here. Everybody's bought in, of course, but I think Dan Campbell really has just breathed life back into the city of Detroit, and everybody is standing by him just waiting to see what happens this year, because you're right. They are very, very, very good. But with as good as they are, what do you think that they need to improve upon the most, I guess is the way that I should answer this? Because Tampa Bay looked like they lacked in the running game, right? They failed to find consistency with the run game. Baker Mayfield had to play hero ball. He ended up failing with an interception in the end of the game to cap it, despite having the opportunity to maybe come back. What did Detroit do right on defense? I guess what was your biggest takeaway? What did they do the best on defense to kind of shore up this Tampa Bay offense and slow this hot team out of Tampa Bay?
Well, what you just said is going to be the biggest factor going into next week. I'm not really concerned. I know San Francisco has a great defense, and I know they're going to try to put some pressure on Goff, but I'm not concerned about the Lions' offense. They're going to move the ball, and they're going to score points. To me, it's on the defensive side of the ball, and can they get enough stops to win this game? Because, I think they're going to score points, but you just mentioned it with Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay does not really have a running game, so they get one-dimensional a lot with Baker Mayfield trying to throw the ball. Listen, I'll give a lot of props to the Bucs and Baker Mayfield, because I did not see this being a success. I did not see this relationship that was going to work out. I saw Baker play here in Carolina. I thought his career was pretty much done. So I got to give him a ton of props for how he's resurrected his career. He may have found a home in Tampa. So you got to give them credit with what they did this year. But again, they don't have a run game, and they have to rely on their receivers and Mike Evans. And they still had success with Mike Evans and Godwin and some of these other guys. And so if Detroit wants to win this game against San Francisco, to me, the defense is going to who has to win it. They're going to have to slow down these weapons, whether it's Kittle, Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. And they're really going to have to slow down Christian McCaffrey in the run game, because if Christian McCaffrey gets going in this run game, that play action is going to be wide open for Brock Purdy to just spread it around to his guys. So for me, that's the biggest thing, is can this defensive front not only stop the run game, but get some pressure on Purdy. I'm looking for Hutchinson to have another big game. It's going to be a crazy matchup, him going against Trent Williams, one of the best tackles in the league. But for them to win this game, to me, it's going to be on the defensive side of the ball, stopping the run, so San Francisco can't get into that comfort zone of play action passing.
Expertly said. I agree with everything you just said, actually. I mean, you've pretty much summed up all of my notes to a T. People like you make jobs for people like me really easy, Dustin. I tell you what, man.
Hey, listen, man, I'm having a lot of fun being on with you. And listen, you've made some great points as well, because when we get down to these final two games of the championship games, that's what you have to look for. You have to look for certain aspects of the game, whether it could be special teams, defense, or offense, but which team is going to game plan and exploit those strengths and weaknesses the most to be able to pull out, because we expect close matchups between all four of these teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really hoping that I do hope it's two nail biters here for the championship games. There's been a lot of blowouts this year, like just broad spectrum across the playoffs. There's been a lot of lopsided scores. So yeah, I'm really hoping for a couple of nail biters on championship weekend before we go into the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I don't think you could listen on the AFC side. I don't think you could get a better matchup when you're talking quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. You mentioned the coaches, Harbaugh and Andy Reid. I mean, we're talking about staples of the game now in these positions. And then you look on the flip side, Kyle Shanahan as a coach, and now Dan Campbell's getting his moment. And you've got Jared Goff, who has been to a Super Bowl with another team, and Brock Purdy. Let's not forget last year in the NFC Championship, he got knocked out and was hurt and couldn't come back in. So he's looking for revenge this time around in the NFC Championship. There's so many storylines going into it. I'm not sure we really could have drawn up two better games for a chance to go to the Super Bowl, and it's going to be fun to watch on Sunday.
Absolutely. Agree 100%. But that's all I've got for you today, Dustin. Thank you so much for breaking down the divisional round for me. I know all the listeners are going to be super excited to hear everything that you had to say. And again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming on the show. This was a big deal for me, seeing as how we've worked together previously, and you are much further into the game than I am. So it is really cool having somebody with the type of insight and the perspective that you have on everything going on.
Hey, listen, man, you're doing a great job. It's easy for a guy like me to come on as a guest and, be tossed up the questions to knock them out of the park. So you're the one that's running this thing, setting it up. You're doing a great job. I've enjoyed working with you in the past. And now, listen, I look forward to coming on again in the future so we can continue to talk ball.
Absolutely appreciate it, brother. And with that, we'll close it down. Thank you very much for calling in, Dustin. Really looking forward to having you back onto the show. Have a great day, dude. Enjoy your cold weather while it lasts. It'll be hot before you know it.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on, and enjoy the football this weekend.
Thank you. Later. And all right, everybody, that is our show. I want to give one big last shout out to Dustin Pheifer for coming on and giving us all this really good content. Look out for the next episode this week. I will have another guest appearance for my Thursday show. I appreciate you all. Thank you all for tuning in to the Coach's Quarters once again. Have a terrific day, and I will see you soon.